The 2023 to 2024 South Australian state budget introduced a range of measures aimed at supporting first home buyers and addressing housing affordability concerns. However, the question still remains, how significant will these measures truly be in assisting those trying to enter the housing market? One of the key highlights from the budget is the end of stamp duty for first home buyers who purchase a new home up to the value of $650,000 or land valued up to $400,000 with the intent of building a new property on it. The South Australian government's decision to abolish stamp duty is an interesting one. It's something that I on the channel have been advocating for a really long time. It takes young people quite a long time to save a deposit to buy a house, and they don't often have equity in other property, nor do they have assets that they can sell to leverage that deposit to make a more competitive bid or offer for a property. So now, not having to pay stamp duty for their first home and it being specific to a very small group, a very targeted cluster of people, I think is a really good idea. By exempting first home buyers from this government tax, I think it is going to be encouraging for them to actually continue on their journey of trying to purchase a property and enter the market. And this is nothing but support to them. So it's something that I'm definitely getting around, and I think a lot of other young people will as well. However, there are lots of assumptions underlying this proposition or this opportunity, which I believe ties directly into the reasons why young people struggle so much to enter the housing market. One significant factor that I kind of touched on, but I'm going to dive a little bit more into it now, is that they really struggle to save a deposit. Now, the reasons as to why, there would be lots of inputs and reasons, but let's say two of the more common ones, things that I think would definitely be a big drawback, is high rents as well as high interest rates at the moment. People's borrowing capacity is decreasing, but house price values currently at the time of recording this video haven't really deflated all that much. Additionally, their income may not be sufficient to service a loan. The way a bank assesses an individual for a loan isn't based on how much money they're bringing to the table as a deposit, it's how they're going to be able to service a loan over a long period of time. Pending where interest rates are, it's a pretty simple calculation to work out what it's going to cost them on a weekly or fortnightly basis. And if they look at their spending habits compared to their take-home income, it's going to be pretty easy to see where they're sitting in their ability to do this. The caveat as well to this as well is young people generally are in the early stages of a career. They're not earning big bucks yet. They haven't developed the skill sets required to be able to be in a position to negotiate higher salaries, higher income. So it's kind of a double header where it really works against them when they want to do this thing, as in buy a property and get into the property market. It just works directly against them because they're not in a position to do so compared to others who are in the market ready to go. Another consideration with this new incentive as well is that it's likely going to push individuals out of the city and into more remote areas where there may potentially be a lack of infrastructure to support them. Paradoxically, this could result in higher costs for them, particularly in the realm of transport. For instance, those who have to travel from distant locations into the city for work are going to incur higher costs on their vehicles. It's not just going to be petrol that we're talking here, it's also going to be maintenance, wear and tear, and potentially increased likelihood of accidents occurring, which could cost them even more. Typically, this is because Australia's public transport infrastructure is really lacking compared to the rest of the world. Another concern focuses on the availability of suitable new builds or land packages that fall within the criteria prices of things like the first home owner's buyer grant, as well as what the stamp duty limits or thresholds are as well. It raises the question as to whether or not it's actually possible to find a suitable new build in a desirable location at a suitable price. And while I definitely don't want to sound negative, I still want to shed light on the fact that when you consider and bundle all of these considerations up, it may actually end up being more expensive for a young person to take this incentive up, save a bit of money with the upfront costs, but over a long period of time, it may actually end up costing them more, and not just in the form of a dollar value. It may also cost them their mental health. It may also cost them their health in general. Physical health is the other one I was trying to touch on there. It's really quite interesting because when you in this initial stage of I'm going to buy a house and I have access to this information and these opportunities and these incentives, you're not really thinking long term. But when you kind of space it out, do a bit of planning and work out, if I'm gonna have to drive 100 kilometers every single day for 20 years because I'm not gonna be able to upgrade my house anytime soon, you could probably do some estimations and work out how much that is going to cost you over a long period of time. Now back to being positive. This incentive overall definitely should be a benefit for young people who qualify for this exemption. Purchasing a property that's a new build up to $650,000, that's we'll call it a small window of people that are going to be looking within that bracket. People like myself, where I've already got a property, I don't qualify for this exemption. So if I want to buy another property, I'm gonna have to pay stamp duty and factor that into what I'm able to make as an offer. Whereas these others who do qualify for these loans are gonna be in a position where they can bid a little bit more money and potentially push them over the edge with their bid to actually obtain that property. And the idea behind this is that I, who won't qualify for this exemption, might not necessarily just be looking at new builds if I wanted to purchase another property, because I'm not going to get anything from doing that outside of the fact that it would be a new build. This is where it's really interesting, because the incentive theoretically should keep existing home sales stable and the market relatively stable, whilst giving a little bit of an edge to new home buyers who do qualify. The other thing that it may also boost is the supply of new builds, which is something that pretty much at the moment, Australia-wide, we are lacking enough housing for the demand that is currently here. So increasing supply over time is also a key benefit, because it means, more people have availability and options depending on where it is that they're living. In addition to stamp duty relief, the state government has also increased the first home owners buyer grant threshold from $575,000 to $650,000. This adjustment simply is a response to the rising cost of land as well as construction within Australia as a whole. I'll briefly go into detail about the first home owners buyer grant in a moment, but I just wanted to mention that I've actually made a more comprehensive video, and you can go and watch it at any time right here. I highly encourage you to give it a watch. If you're in the market, you're looking for opportunities, you live within South Australia or anywhere within Australia, it is a Australia-wide grant. If you want to learn more about it, link is in the description down below. By aligning the first home owners buyer grant to the medium household price within South Australia, being that $675,000 number, the South Australian government really is showing their commitment to try and keep home ownership within reach for young millennials. Millennials is what I'm saying, Gen Z, young people in general. Now, what this actually means from a dollar perspective is that if you account for both the stamp duty relief and the first home owners buyer grant and were to purchase something up to $650,000 that qualifies for both of these exemptions, well, one's an exemption, one's a grant, you would get roughly $30,000 in stamp duty relief and $15,000 from the first home owners buyer grant. Add them together, that is $45,000 being offered up front to help a young person, a person who's a first home buyer, to get into their home, which in my opinion is incredibly generous, and it's a pretty good opportunity for those really struggling to save that deposit. And like I mentioned just before as well, this should incentivize new builds and supply increasing to address the imbalance of supply versus demand that we've been seeing ever since COVID-19. Essentially, what's really wild is that the construction industry has slowed down ever so slightly since the pandemic, because incentives and stimulus has kind of slowed down as well for that specific reasoning. And so this hopefully will inject a new, we'll call it, pump of energy into this world of increasing supply of properties. In addition to what I've just mentioned as well, the South Australian government has committed roughly $475 million to addressing key concerns and issues within the world of housing within the state. This package aims to address multiple facets of the housing issue we're currently experiencing, and it also offers up a range of incentives. Some of these incentives include things like increasing public housing by constructing new builds, whilst also halting the sale of existing government-owned housing. For those interested as well, the package is apparently also releasing up to 25,000 blocks in both the north and south of the state, or the city metropolitan area, to increase, again, opportunity for supply to grow. A more controversial one is that the state government also introduced a new law to kind of hinder or stop rent bidding from taking place. to kind of create a more stable rental market. However, it is important to understand that despite these measures, it's still something that's going to be incredibly hard to prove or catch people doing the wrong thing, being landlords allowing this to take place, because who in their right mind is really going to dob themselves in, say, hey, I offered my landlord more money and he gave me the house. I don't know how on earth that scenario is going to unfold when there is so much demand at the moment for housing. There's a rental crisis as well as a ownership crisis as well. I genuinely believe landlords will still be able to circumvent this law without facing any consequences at all. The last thing from the budget that I thought was pretty interesting and worth mentioning as well is that apparently they're establishing a new head office for regional housing through Renewal SA, which is intended to stimulate the growth of housing in regional locations throughout South Australia. However, I'd like to chime in again and mention the existing challenges for these regional locations, as the necessary infrastructure and amenities required to entice individuals to relocate to regional areas are comparatively lacking to the well-established metropolitan suburbs of the state. In conclusion, these initiatives are expected to increase the rate of home ownership as well as the supply of housing within the housing market. While there are positive aspects to these strategies, like its ability to potentially address housing costs as well as homelessness, I still believe it is a sidestep by the government for certain reasons. Until they confront and address the policies that allow the wealthy to continue to build wealth through mechanisms like negative gearing, depreciation, and tax incentives or tax offsets or tax deductions, nothing is really going to change for the better. That's something that is a controversial point, something that I'll come back to in my videos often, even as someone who reaps the rewards of all of those mentioned benefits. It's still something that creates an unfair advantage to those who have the capital up front, to those who take the risk and can basically maintain or service a loan once taken out. It rewards them long term, whereas it still makes it incredibly difficult for others who aren't in a position to do so. Without directly addressing these issues, the implementation of these new incentives and offerings are probably going to push individuals out to regional areas that lack the infrastructure to support them. I've already mentioned that, you're aware. The other thing that it may do as well is actually drive house prices up, which is not a desirable outcome, but something that could very possibly and truly happen. As a one-liner to wrap up today's video, it feels like the government has slapped a band-aid on an open wound, which is Australia's current housing market. I'm gonna pretty much leave it there because I could rant forever. There are problems that aren't being addressed. There are new incentives which will help some people, but I don't know how much it will help them and could potentially also cause them some harm long-term. Something to think about, and that's where I'm going to leave you today. So if you learned something, if you liked what I had to say, you didn't like what I had to say, show me by hitting that like or dislike button. Engagement is good. Subscribe button as well. It's a red button. It's fun to push. Go on, give it a quick click. And I'll leave you there. Have a good day. Have a good week. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.